I'm here today with Anatoly Yakovenko, who's agreed to come on and talk about Bunker Coin. Anatoly, do you want to introduce yourself quickly? I think most people probably know who you are.
Good to be here. So I'm Anatoly. I'm co-founder of Solana Labs, engineer by trade. Solana is kind of my baby.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on. First thing I wanted to ask you quickly is, if I called you right now, would you answer on a Saga phone or would you answer on an iPhone?
I have a number on both, so depending which number you use, I would answer on that one. So I use both. I got the Saga I use for NFTs. The iPhone is better hooked up with all the security stuff at work with accounts and stuff like that. It's just Android isn't as good at these days at like that. But so I gotta use both.
Okay, well actually that's encouraging. You've been extremely bullish on the Saga phone recently on Twitter, so that's exciting. I'm glad to hear you're using it in tandem. Okay, well, I think that we should talk about stuff that you don't usually get asked about. So let's dig in. Okay, I want to ask you first and foremost, just get right into it. Do you think that the Rollup centric roadmap was a mistake for Ethereum?
They have I don't know, what is it today? $300 billion ship that they have to steer, right? And slowly make changes that slowly improve the network without ruining what they have and without causing a catastrophic bug. I would not want to be in their shoes, or Peter, who's the Geth maintainer. Peter, my God, man, that's got to be the most stressful open source maintainer job in the world. You accidentally merge a change that has a catastrophic safety bug. Ethereum has some integer overflow bug causes more ETH to be created. It sucks. Fuck, I would not want to have that job ever. So the changes that they add and slowly kind of move are happening. I think the Rollup thing is a pretty decent in between. I don't know what the final state of Ethereum is going to look like, even if they want to do this kind of big Rollup centric thing. Just the user experiences are not great. The value capture, I think, all happens in the execution layer. Stuff like this, I think, is going to start probably causing people to think about can they do a hybrid approach where there's some stuff happening in the layer one alongside with the rollups, and we'll kind of see. It sucks to be them. It's also great to be them, right? If Solana is as successful as Ethereum, I'm not going to be, I'm also going to be super freaked out about every change that goes into the protocol. But hopefully at that point, we have better client diversity. I think in a lot of ways, Solana is blessed to have Ethereum have to deal with all these things in a much safer and longer way, and we get to be the underdog and an outage, right? Solana outage happened. Nobody it was okay. Life moved on. The world didn't stop, right? I think if an Ethereum outage happened, it would be catastrophe for the whole space. Knock on wood, there's no, we don't see any more Solana outages, but it's just they're in a different spot altogether in terms of adoption and maturity and the eyes and the pressure and everything.
Okay, we're going to come back to that more. We're going to harp on that more, but there's been this big discussion recently about client diversity.
The problem with it is, well, you need it. Why is Firedancer being built? Is because if you remember back in the day, Bitcoin had a bug where they integer overflow created infinite Bitcoins. So a bug like that is catastrophic, right? It's really catastrophic to the network because it'll break all it. If attacker executes it, they could break all the DeFi, just totally fuck everything up. So you need multiple implementations. So the probability of that same bug existing in two different implementations is pretty low, virtually zero. So as soon as Firedancer's out, I'm going to be pushing for 50% or over 33% of nodes running Firedancer. And the problem there is that like it's if two different clients written by two different teams from a very complicated spec are going to have impedance mismatches, stuff is not going to work perfectly, and that could lead to a liveness failure, an outage, or at least part of the network dies, the other one's still making blocks, but there's no finality or confirmation. And in Ethereum, in that state, you actually get slashed if you have a client that is down. On Solana, you don't get slashed. My view is that like safety is really, really paramount. That's the most important thing. If there's an outage, it sucks. We fix the bugs. We try harder. We test more. We hopefully find all of them. But like ideally, you have 4 clients evenly split. So when there is like one of those impedance mismatches and one of the clients dies, the rest of the network continues, and you fix that one, and then you don't even have those kinds of interruptions. But the key part that's really, really important is that there's a safety bug that the state diverges, the network actually does halt. That's a good outcome. So what's weird about the liveness, the whatever inactivity leak, is it actually discourages people from taking the risk of using another client because they don't want to be the ones that are being punished. So I think that an activity leak might be a bad incentive. The negative externalities of it are actually pretty bad. I don't think Solana would ever have it. And I think from like kind of the community perspective, like let's optimize safety. And like make sure that there's 2 clients. And if like there's an outage because of that, so be it. But it's better to be safe than sorry, you know?
Yeah. So what do you think? Like, I mean, Bitcoin Core is run by, I don't know, a high 90% of nodes.
Bitcoin is really slow, and that gives you some advantages, and it's really simple. So in that bug with the integer overflow bug in Bitcoin, they didn't have to, it wasn't an outage. They literally just like fixed the bug and pointed it back to a block that was like 5 hours ago and started building on that chain. Technically, nothing in Bitcoin broke. It's part of the protocol to do that. And it's on you if you accept a confirmation in 6 blocks instead of 8 hours. And, you know, like, because it's so slow, you actually have time. Like, so many people are watching it now. If there was a block produced now that caused an integer overflow, I think PagerDuty across everywhere, Binance, Coinbase, everywhere would go off, right? And then like everyone would be like, what the fuck happened? Let's go fix this as soon as possible. Don't accept any confirmations. And then that rollback wouldn't even impact anyone financially. But in a fast chain, like especially like Solana or like Ethereum, it's far more dangerous actually. So like in my view, it's kind of like as soon as you start shrinking block times, I don't think you can reasonably have a system that picks liveness over safety. You have to be safety over liveness. You have to stop in case something looks just like doesn't look right, and then figure it out, fix it, continue. For all practical purposes, you know.
So let me ask you this. Let's say that Firedancer comes out, and I know there's been a lot of discussion about the specs, and honestly, I'm not technical enough really to interpret what exactly that means, but there's people who are quite bullish on it. And I saw one of the Firedancer devs recently, like sort of mention, actually, he said something along the lines of like, you could effectively have a single client running, and then in the case of some critical bug, there's the ability to hot swap. Is this functionally true? Like, could you just swap in, another client without any, severe penalties for the chain?
The problem there is like detecting what is a bug and what isn't. Okay. Like, how do you know, right? Like that you've experienced a bug. There's some bugs you can't do that. Like your node falls behind, it can't process transactions. There's like resource issues, and then you have like kind of standard primary to secondary failover. Like you run both clients, Labs and Firedancer, and Labs one falls behind. We have a bug in some cache and the resources get blown up and it can't keep up. You fail over to Firedancer, you don't skip a beat, everything's running. But the safety bugs that you care about is if labs computes one set of state and Firedancer computes another one, they disagree on what the state of the chain is. That's when you need to halt, because you don't know which one is the right one. So you can't hot swap one or the other. That we actually would rather prefer you halt both. So like I would hope once Firedancer's out, all the top staking providers, top, like exchanges, the circles, the wormholes of the world, they run both clients. If they ever disagree, deposits stop for a while, right? Who cares, right? Like, like wormhole stops for a while, right? Circle stops for a while. Like none of that stuff is as important as if there's a critical safety bug, like the network should stop, the engineers go figure it out and fix it. The problem there is that like it's new code, right? It's complex. It's trying to implement the same spec that's really ill-defined, and it's large, right? It's got a big surface area, so a bunch of little small mistakes could cause it to diverge in a way that is different because the computation is different, but it's meaningless. Like the error code on some transaction is 1 on Labs and 2 on Firedancer, has no impact on finances of anyone, but that would cause the state to diverge, and then you have to figure it out. So there's hopefully, I imagine like during the initial bootstrapping phase when Firedance is running with like 1 to 5% of the stake, you're going to see a bunch of those. But at some point, they're going to happen, once a week, then once a month, then once 6 months, but then not for a year. And you're like, okay, it's kind of ready.
What do you think? Okay, so like go back to Ethereum for a second now with this recent, what was it? It was the bug in Besu or Nethermind? I forget. So one of these clients had a bug, and there were some people on Twitter mainly saying that if Geth was to go down and there was like, severe penalties for stakers, that they should have to incur that. And the reason that this is obviously like somewhat of a contentious statement is because a large portion of the network runs on Geth. Like, what do you think of this fundamentally? Like, just I don't know, maybe ideologically, like, is this like a stance? Because I mean, I see a lot of the more what I would consider to be sort of cypherpunk versions of Ethereum people saying, yeah, like this is something that we have warned about, and there's no bailouts. Yep. But like when there's this much of the network running on Geth, it's kind of like, okay, well, I mean, cut off your nose to spite your face, type thing. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? And then we kind of move on from this.
That's the fundamental defense that anyone has against an attacker. Like, if on Solana somebody corrupted the quorum and created 2 headers that double signed and committed to state roots, all the honest nodes would halt because they would see this like inconsistency, and we'd be like, okay, a bunch of machines halted, what the network's running, but like none of the machines that we're trying to boot up are connecting. The quorum is corrupted. It means it's been taken over by an attacker. Theoretically, the only defense that we have, right, is that we boot up another quorum and we slash the previous one, so they can't economically go recreate the attack. So it costs them a lot to go do it again. That's the only defense that you have. That's the right thing to do. The question is, like, did this happen because of a bug? And it's the fault of like the developers, right? Or is it really an economic attack, right? And this is where like the social consensus and all this stuff plays out. And I don't think the incentives, the inactivity leak capture those. Like, it's obvious that, what's happening in Ethereum is that it actually is incentivizing everyone to go with the herd and stick with Geth because they think that's the safest one. And if Beso or whatever has an outage, then they're paying like the slashing penalty. I think the way to apply this would be to actually like not have an activity leak, but to have the slashing penalty be applied during the restart by hand through social consensus. And in that time, you can identify, was this an attack? Was this really somebody that like bought off all the stake and then double signed the header? Very, very unlikely, but could have been the attack. Or was this really just a bug in the code, which is the most likely outcome, not really the fault of anyone? And then, yeah. So I don't know. These are like, these are really good questions and really hard to answer because like the engineers that are building these systems have this vision of like it's a system that is self-repairing and running autonomously, and the incentives perfectly get everyone to do the right thing. But
Yeah, and I think like especially with at least the rationale that I saw, which I don't think is, I mean, I don't think it's illogical. It's that like if we don't take a stand when like when something like this happens, if we don't take a stand, then like where do we draw the line? And I mean, like I kind of troll about this a lot, but like I don't think I think it makes sense. Like if we're going to promote client diversity, right? Like if we're going to take the stand that like client diversity is like a critical feature of this network, then if one of the clients messes up, regardless of whether or not it's for like an economic attack or for like a bug in the code, like if we're not going to deploy the deterrence mechanisms that we have, then what are we going to do? Like going forward. So I don't know. It is kind of like, it's kind of a code as law question. It's also kind of like there's like a screw up in like one of the like smaller clients. Like,
right.
Go ahead.
But the incentives right now are only the stick. There's no carrot for client diversity.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't disagree. Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting. I don't know. Like, yeah, I think that this is, this kind of goes back to a lot of the original kind of ethos with Ethereum and the client diversity. And it's also something that not that I would say like I had some strong belief on this as a Bitcoiner, but it is interesting to see just like, Bitcoin Core is something that has just.
Well, my view is that the strength of these systems comes from this assumption that a single node that has the right copy of the ledger can prove correctness and can recreate the whole network, even if all the other copies are corrupted. And it has nothing to do with liveness or inactivity. In fact, like that's a state that's usually the network's dead, right? And you only have one copy, and then like somebody on the internet says, "No, guys, I got the ledger; it's not corrupted. Can verify all the signatures, and we can continue." That's like what makes these like kind of like really hard to kill, viruses, right? You kill everything but one node, and then it repopulates. So you want to encourage that. You want to encourage as many individual systems with as big of an environment. And in my mind, that means that like you take a hit on liveness. Like what if there's more outages? Is that big of a deal? But you do have that everyone's running different clients. They're running them for that purpose, that if at least one of those will survive and one of those will be a copy. And that means maybe the system is not as stable as it would be if it was, 80% gap.
Okay. I want to come back a little bit to the first question I asked, or I don't know if it's the first question, but like the modular roll-up centric roadmap.
Yeah.
So like, I want to ask you, like, there was obviously, maybe it's a bit trite at this point, but there was this Ethereum alignment, and I mean, obviously you're on Twitter, you see this. I want to ask you, like, more specifically, first of all, like generally, what did you think of this? But also, how much do you think Solana benefited from this?
The roll-up, the Ethereum roll-up is perfect. I don't worry about. Don't worry about competitors with 100 roll-ups. Worry about a competitor with only one roll-up, I would say. So, like, I think what people need to realize is that data availability or the raw resource costs are a commodity, and they're going to be priced like a commodity. Like, if all you're selling is data, it's going to be priced at 64 cents per terabyte. Because that's what I'm getting out of like Latitude, and maybe you could price it 4 times as much. But if you go much more above that, somebody else will then build another network that is a data availability network and undercut you. And you can argue to your heart's content that doesn't inherit the security. But as we see in marketing, people call that Ethereum aligned rollup, even if it settles on EigenLayer or Celestia or whatever. Like nobody really cares about those things or evaluates them.
I'm gonna take. Look, I'm the first one to say that people generally don't care. Like functionally, users don't care so much about this. With that said, I mean, you've seen these discussions with Dankrad. I think you've perhaps opined at
They
points as well.
They don't care about this because there have been zero failures from data withholding. Throughout all of crypto history in 15 years, there have been not a single attack where an attacker withheld data.
Okay, so would you consider you could have an Ethereum L2 that does not post its data?
It'll market itself as an Ethereum L2, and it will be competing with
certainly,
all the,
yes.
and it's going to be competing for fees from Ethereum users, and will be competing for Ethereum liquidity from all the L2s that do post their data and fraud proofs. So that environment is going to be cheaper, potentially faster, might even give them like a bullshit fast confirmation. Oh, my sequencer got it. You're good to go. And it's competing with everything else in Ethereum. And Ethereum, will be maybe generating some fees from the blobs, but if those are priced at commodity storage, then you will have like the cost of those is going to like either they have to constrain the supply of blobs to be so low that it's somehow seen as premium data storage, and you can kind of use marketing to say, hey, we're using true Ethereum data storage and this is a true L2, and then you're fighting in marketing side with everyone else. But like users are not going to see a perceptible difference, because literally throughout all of crypto history, despite the nearly 1,000 Tendermint chains with every possible like fuck up under the sun, there's been not a single failure that was like the majority of the quorum withheld the data and posted an invalid route. It's never happened.
Yeah. Okay. So you've said that Solana could be an Ethereum L2. Like
also that Ethereum could be a Solana L2.
Yeah, but I think people know that you're trolling, like mainly when you say this, or like it's a factual troll, but I know what you're doing, right? Like you're attempting to trivialize the definition of an L2, which I think is reasonable at this point. Like we have these rollups that are saying they're Ethereum aligned. Now, like whatever that ends up being long run, we're not sure yet, but like they do have some stated goals. Like I would say, right? Like they use Ethereum for data availability. They are like you can okay, maybe not, but like you can force exit, right? Like if the validator set is like you can leave whenever you want, right? So these are like stated goals.
If the data is not on Ethereum, the attacker could withhold data, and then you can't exit.
Okay. I want to ask. What is an example?
You could build. Okay, so the reason I'm trolling is that people have been really loose with the definition of a rollup and an L2. Okay. To the point where I can make the argument that you can make Solana and Ethereum L2. And the only one that was able to actually give a really good response to that was, what's his name, Torgal from Scroll. But basically, imagine in the future, Ethereum magically has this infinite DA layer. You take all of Solana blocks and you submit them to that DA layer. So now Solana data is inside Ethereum, right? And then you post a Solana state root to Ethereum and a proof that the execution was correct, or a timeout, and then that has a fault proof, just like Arbitrum, run the exact same setup, right? Solana validators still run and encode their own transactions. So if I post a transaction to Ethereum that says, I want to take my wrapped ETH on Solana and now exit it, and the Solana validators don't include it, you can then eject the Solana validators as the quorum that decides the validity of the state root inside Ethereum, and elect a new one that includes my exit transaction. So if the Solana validator set does censorship, does the bad thing, right? Censors Ethereum users who are trying to exit. Because they have all the data for all the blocks, they can actually eject the quorum, elect a new one, take over the root on Ethereum, and continue. And in that point, what Solana validators are doing is now disconnected from the state root on Ethereum, and you can kind of think of it as a fork. So now there's like two SVMs. One is Solana Classic, one is Solana Ethereum. And which one is Solana? Nobody knows. And Torgel, like he to his credit, said that what matters is the actual
fork.
social consensus.
Yeah.
No, it's like what is the alignment of the team of everyone that decides what is the true one. Like if everybody in the world believes that the root on Ethereum is the true Solana, then it doesn't matter if Arbitrum's, replace now Solana with Arbitrum. If everyone in the world believes that the true state root for Arbitrum is the one on Ethereum, the sequencers for Arbitrum can't go like YOLO and be like, fuck it, we're censoring everyone. We're now running our own Arbitrum chain, right? So that like social kind of glue is what decides what's an L2 or not the data availability, interestingly enough. And so you can then argue that like all of these like BS L2 constructs are L2s in the sense that they're all saying that no matter what Ethereum does, if there's a hard fork or whatever, we're sticking with whatever the Ethereum state decides as the L2 root. And Solana is not going to do that, right? Because people in this ecosystem are building their own thing. The validator set actually matters.
Right. That's sort of what that was sort of what I was getting at initially. Was like with regards to I was going to ask you like what would be an example of why Solana might become an L2, because the reason I see this like, and maybe I'm like missing the technical nuance here, but like to me it's like Solana intends to be both an execution and settlement environment, right? Like it is a layer 1 blockchain, whereas like these rollups don't fully intend to do that. Although we're both looking at the same rollups and seeing that they are functionally their own blockchains as well. So I understand, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so like basically implementation wise, there's no difference between Solana as an L2 and Solana as not an L2 as its own thing. So it's all community kind of the social glue that's going to drive that. What would make Solana have a data validating bridge to Ethereum is basically the cost of that bridge being low enough to the point where somebody like Wormhole feels like this would be competitive advantage for us to have this bridge. So they do the whole sync Solana blocks to Ethereum, post a state root, do that whole check, and then convince Ethereum users, hey, no matter what, even if Solana validators go F off, this bridge is safe. You will always be able to exit. So you should go use it. So there's an advantage to go do that whole thing because you actually do improve the safety of the Ethereum users. But it's tricky because if you deposit ETH through this bridge and now your ETH is inside some DeFi position against Sol, and the hard fork happens where Solana goes one way, Ethereum goes another, and now those two state roots are separated. What is the value of that Sol in that position in that bridged state root? It's going to be like chaos, right? And Dogel's argument is that if it was Arbitrum, because Arbitrum is always aligned with ETH, and that you would have a lot less chaos in theory. So that's kind of like the big question. So from my point of view, like, yeah, you can build these bridges. Maybe they'll have a commercial advantage. If they do, Wormhole will build it. If not, then they'll just be using a multi-sig and no one's going to care.
Okay, we're going to stay on L2s for a second. What do you think of shared sequencing or sequencing in general on L2s? Like, what is your like general overview?
Yeah, they're trying to fix that. Like, there's no atomic guarantees between all these environments. So then if you throw them all in a shared sequencer that executes stuff, and then that sequencer gives you finality guarantees, you can then settle stuff. And when it settles, you preserve those finality guarantees. But it's going to be like, unless that sequencer is basically Solana, it's going to be kind of a massively centralizing force. We'll have like one sequencer somewhere that's now in charge of sequencing a bunch of rollups, and the only reliable way you can manage it in a censorship resistant way is if you prove that it's censoring, then you run some auction to kick it off. And that's like, you're censorship resistant, but in like a couple hours. It's not these are like you're like starting to like slowly slice off all the benefits of decentralization and CR to the point where you have like a stub that looks like TradFi.
Yeah, and that's actually like that's sort of okay. So like this is mainly my view as well. It's like if we continue to, and I'm not sure this is exactly the phrase, but I can't think of a better one right now. If we continue to like fragment consensus, like further and further, then we have like a smaller and smaller set of people who are ultimately making at least some of the decisions, right? Like the sequencing aspect may not be the same as the validating aspect on all these L2s and whatnot, but like we're certainly reducing that size, right? And so like I think this is where it's interesting, like kind of maybe comparison with Solana is that there are people who would argue, like, and I don't think this is an illegitimate argument. There are people who would argue that like the number of people who can credibly sequence transactions on Solana is relatively finite right now, but it kind of we're now sort of at the same juncture, and that's what I think like I found interesting and like why I have followed maybe like Solana a bit more closely recently and just also noticed this. It's like, okay, but like we're most of these sequencing, like shared sequencing efforts, like most of these are scaling with effectively more blockchains. Like, you know what I mean? We're adding more blockchains and we're reducing the number of people who are really participating.
The big problem is that you're not going to see a sequencer. Like people are building using Solana as a sequencer. That kind of makes sense because you're just leveraging the censorship resistance of the network. But it's going to be hard. Like you basically have to rebuild Solana.
And it's a huge head start.
Right. As a sequencer to be competitive with it on that property. It's a big pain in the ass. The other thing is that like the entry point to Solana is just hardware, right? It's always like, it's somewhat expensive now, but it's literally 4 times cheaper now than when we started. It was like $1,200 to run a validator like 4 years ago. It's $350 now. So like
that's how much it costs to run a Solana validator.
$350 a month, yeah. From Latitude or TerraSwitch, you get a box with 32 cores, 1 gigabit internet. Go have a ball. So like that price is probably going to be under 200 by like next year. Like it's just organized sand. It gets cheaper and cheaper. To like be a sequencer that is handling like more and more blockchains, those are all business decisions between teams. And then there's auctions to elect him with DAOs of like which L2 DAO allows which sequencer to sequence it. Right, it's not a permissionless environment in the sense that like I just throw a box and I'm part of the network. Like it's a much more like, looks like TradFi to me. Like, I don't know. Like it's BD deals between DAOs controlling multi-sigs, right? On all these bridges.
Yeah. And I think like to Ethereum's credit, like I don't think this is lost upon them. Like, and I think you know that too. Now like whether or not some of these problems are rectifiable in the short to medium term, I'm not sure, or in the long term, like for that matter. But like I think that the Ethereum community is generally aware of this stuff, but it does kind of it's also not lost upon me that like you kind of converge back on like, okay, so then why aren't we just using an execution and settlement layer that is already effectively sequencing transactions? You know what I mean? But I don't want to throw a dog in this fight, but like I understand the rationale, and I don't think it. I think it makes sense. Okay, but
look, any technology always goes through modularizing everything and then vertically integrating everything. That's the super cycle. You have people that are always trying to split the system, and then people that are always trying to put it together and optimize it. It's part of life. Like I've always liked the splitting part sucks because you make something slower. So like just stick with making really something faster.
Passionate about speed. Okay, I heard you say something interesting recently. I don't know if you said it or you tweeted it, but you were talking about like your vision. And correct me if I'm wrong here because I'm just kind of going off the cuff. But I think what you said was like your goal is to have tons of distributed data centers, and there may be value in co-locating around these data centers at some point, like hotspots or something. Is this like essentially what you said?
What I want to see is like block producers. Like the kind of the end state for Solana is that we can run multiple concurrent block producers, and those should be like instantiated near where there is like client demand, because we want to cut the latency from the user to that node. So there's kind of like that that end state, but I don't know how to achieve it in an unbiased way without like over allocating. And by that I mean, like, let's say, like Europe, South America, Asia, those are all like hotspots. So there's 3 of them. For random chance to land a block producer in each one of those, we probably need like twice as many, like 6 concurrent ones. So that's one way to do it, right? Like you just like tune the system, optimize it, add more cores, like do everything we can to where it can support 6 to 8 concurrent block producers. And then those are randomly distributed because we want to be unbiased by stake weight. And then hopefully all those land near the user. And most of the time they will. And then you cut latency, and like that's how you kind of like get to that effect, the same effect where users are really close to a block producer. But it's not like co-location in the sense we want to put all the validators in one spot. That wouldn't really help. Like what you actually care about is the block producer being close to the user, not like the voting validators. That helps a bit, but not as long as you're going to have them across continents anyways. Like as long as there's no super majority on one continent, it doesn't help. Like you actually either need to put like more than 2/3 of them all in one spot, or you might as well optimize for the fact that you're not going to have that.
What do you think about how Ethereum has handled MEV, accelerationism, whatever you want to call it, like whatever buzzword you want to throw in? But like what are your thoughts on at least the L1 MEV?
Yeah, so like execution layer, my view is that like MEV is just both a bug and a feature. It's like one of the ways that like the way I think of these black boxes economically is like there's real costs, like cost of the hardware, cost of the people to run the boxes. And there's real, like somebody then does real work and pays somebody inside the black box to include them in a transaction. And it doesn't matter if I like take a sack of potatoes and give them to a validator as a bribe over a side channel and say, hey, I'm going to be submitting transactions. Please include them. Here are all my potatoes. Because that's a gain that the validator has. And then they're incentivized to go sell your potatoes, go get more stake. So then they can get more potatoes, right? And then get more stake. It doesn't matter where that money comes from, whether it's MEV, whether it's some other side channel. So from my perspective, like I'm more on the accelerationist camp. But there is negative externalities to it where users like think that they're like, oh, I'm going to get market price in this trade, and they get horribly sandwiched. And to deal with those, it's going to be like holistic. You need like flash bots or whatever that are not built by 100% malicious people that can build in those barriers. You need like protocols that take into account the slippage and all those things that can do spot orders. Like Jupyter DCA is an awesome feature that like prevents 99% of like the malicious kind of MAV that you see, like that could really wreck you. So stuff like this, you need a whole bunch of like people that understand each part of the propagation and kind of stack where MEV can be extracted and try to do their best to make sure that the kind of negative externalities of it aren't there. But at the same time, like there's positive effects. Validators make more money when I pay them to order transactions in a specific way.
Yeah, I think that, okay, so certainly.
So like from a very high level, what I want is maximizing MEV competition. So if MEV is valuable, me as a validator, I should be bribing users. I should be telling users, send me all your transactions exclusively. And I will order them and put them in blocks. And if you do that, I'll give you a rebate from all my MEV. That should be kind of like the equilibrium, because then I'm getting all the user transactions. The other block producers are not, right? So I get monopoly over ordering over this particular set of events. I maximize MEV. I give a rebate back to the users. The users get the rebate. They send me more transactions, right? That's kind of the equilibrium state. And that works when the UX for that can be sustained. And for that to be a good UX, you need the block producers that are all collaborating in this rebate environment to be frequently scheduled. So the more block producers per second we can schedule, the more likely that like users always have an option of like, you know, Jito stake pool MEV rebate optimizers versus like marinade ones, right? And I can pick the best one. So like,
yeah. I mean, I think competition is obviously the goal with this stuff, but at the same time, like we've already seen, I think most people would say pretty high economies of scale with block building, and like I don't know exactly what your thoughts are regarding speed. I know this maybe sounds a bit tangential, but like I've heard you and intuitively, but granted, this is not my domain. It sounds like the faster something goes, the less
MEV
MEV.
there is. Yes.
Yes. But I don't know that this. I don't know. Yeah, like okay, so you laugh, but like this is not a completely agreed upon point. I think Tarun wrote a paper that maybe said something to this extent, but I don't really want to chime in here. But what I will say is,
admit to it.
yes, they do. Yes. Of course. Like this is not such a popular stance. But the thing is, I don't know that this necessarily reduces the economies of scale. Like because like these things can be so very profitable, as you know, and to build blocks, but consistently. Go ahead.
At the same volume of trading on Solana, there's like way less MEV than on Ethereum because it's faster, and the window, right? Like if you're like you get a bunch of sequence of transactions from users, they observe state, they submit transactions, so MEV happens when the state on chain starts to separate from the state in the real world, which includes exchanges, dexes, and that current transaction pool. But the faster the blocks and the faster the confirmation, the faster the state on chain is reconciled with the rest of the world. So that window for extraction is shorter. And because it's shorter, there's less value to extract because it's like you're trying to do a derivative approximation. If you take a sample very quickly, your approximation of the derivative is going to be much better to the real one than if you take a granular sample. Right. Like,
well, and also like you can see this, like when there's volatility on Binance, this is when like Beaver and rsync are most likely to win blocks, right? Because like they can bid higher during these periods of time when there is like more of a diversion from the on-chain world versus the off-chain world. I'm not so yet sold though. I am like, it seems logical that the faster it goes, that the less MEV is extracted. And honestly, like there is some precedent for this in TradFi, like for that matter, like when all of these, like HFT firms that are co-located near these stock exchanges in New York, like when they have to compete on speed, users actually get pretty good execution. Like all things considered. I mean, TradFi gets better execution than DeFi most of the time, right? Like, so, I mean, that makes sense. I don't know what the long-term, like economies of scale look like for Solana so much, but I think it's good they're competing on speed, maybe.
And like our goal is to cut block times to like 120 milliseconds with multiple block producers around the world. So then the latency between what the on-chain state and the real world, like Binance servers in like Dubai, right?
Tokyo, or
whatever, right? That information cannot propagate around the world in 120 milliseconds. Like that's basically the limit. So the state on Solana is going to be as good as price discovery as the server at Binance. Because some newsworthy event happens somewhere, it's still got to go speed of light through fiber all the way to Dubai. And at that same time, it's going to hit a local block producer, wherever that is, right? And start propagating through Solana. So by the time that news wire hits a trader in Binance and they're trying to make that trade, it should already be reflected on chain state on Solana. That means there's no arbitrage anymore. So like, that's the fundamental limit that we're trying to get to.
I think that Ethereum would say, and I think their goal is to push this to L2s, right? Like that is,
or to capture all of that in a burn.
Okay. Yes. That, yes. But I think that they would say like most MEV will ultimately be, extracted on these execution layers, and that's when we can start tinkering with faster block times and sequencers and so on and so forth. So like, I mean, that would be the plan. Which also brings up like sort of an interesting question that I actually asked Eric Wall last week, and I wish I got more out of him when I asked him this. But like, if Ethereum's goal is really to be this like settlement layer, what do you think about how expressive the L1 is? Like, and I've like sort of, this is something I've thought about, and it doesn't mean anything that I thought about it, but it's like, if it's just going to be this layer that accepts proofs, right? Like from all these L2s, and everything is really happening elsewhere. Do you think that like Ethereum, I guess one like more tangible question, should Ethereum be saying you should develop only on L2s? Like you should not be developing applications on the L1 anymore. But also you can answer the whole question. Or give your thoughts.
So settlement is like the most boring part of finance. DCSS or whatever, right? Can you even name the 2 settlement companies that do stuff in finance?
No, I can't, but I probably wouldn't know them anyway, so, but go ahead.
They handle like 70 trillion worth of assets, charge like 2 bips or whatever. It's the most commoditized part.
Yeah, but okay. This isn't exactly what we mean when we say settlement, though.
That's
like,
but like if
kind of.
But if they ran
guarantees of the distributed validator set, like this is what is promoted as being the most decentralized settlement.
Security comes from your own full node and your own connections. So Circle doesn't give a fuck about the settlement guarantees of Solana because they run their own node. DCSS or whatever that company is could issue all of their $70 trillion worth of stocks on Solana by running a single secure full node without giving any fucks about settlement guarantees of the rest of the network.
This is kind of funny. I don't know if I've ever heard you say something like this. Like this is a bit edgy because, well, I don't know, edgy is the word.
I've said this all the time. Economic security is a stupid meme. It doesn't actually mean anything. You running your own full node is what's providing guarantees, security guarantees. And it's true. Like this is why Circle was able to issue billions of dollars on Solana early on in Solana's like life, right? And deal through all the outages and all that stuff. They weren't like, oh my God, Solana's settlement guarantees are not good enough for Circle. They didn't care, right? Because they run their own full node. They have exact copies of the ledger with all the signatures of all the users that's reconciled against their internal ledgers. Anytime somebody submits a transaction, they verify it, then they do the wire. They don't care what the rest of the network does. Like this, this is like the primary function of these systems is they can provide these one on us node, right? Is all it takes. Those guarantees to the user that's running that one on us node. So this is a stupid meme that people have caught on. I don't know why, but like probably to, keep memeing Ethereum as like the most secure block space or something because the best settlement guarantees. It's meaningless. It's like utterly meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be okay, like I'm usually the one who's very critical here, and also like I do generally agree with you, but yeah, okay, all right, I'll concede. I mean, I've sort of thought this myself, but I also feel like that is like such a massive like part of the Ethereum narrative, right? Like it's going to be the settlement for, yeah. So then, but this is also why. Okay, so wait, let me just like
Tendermint has as good of settlement guarantees as Ethereum.
Well, but this is also why I asked you about Solana becoming an L2 is because like to me functionally it's like what settlement guarantees of Ethereum would somebody from Solana demand? You know what I mean? Like I want this to settle on Ethereum. Like it could be executed on Solana, but like it needs to settle on Ethereum. And I'm sitting here, I'm saying Solana also settles transactions.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
So these are guarantees for Ethereum holders, right? That want to bridge stuff somewhere else. It's a guarantee that they can bridge things back.
But I thought you meant like, okay.
Right. This is what an L2 guarantees is that if I bridge into Arbitrum, I can get my stuff out.
Right.
So Wormhole could
If you
build
know
that
how to
bridge.
actually do the code, which I don't think
Right.
anybody actually does, but yeah.
Do the forced exit, right? Like, so Wormhole could build a bridge where Ethereum users that deposit assets into Wormhole can do a forced exit back, right, through all the proofs and all that stuff. And if they feel like that's worth the cost of, development cost and like actual cost of syncing Solana data and the Ethereum TA, they'll do it because it'll be, EV positive for them. But if it's not, then they won't. And I don't think it matters to Circle or anyone else or like anyone like BlackRock that if they issue like $1 trillion worth of assets, engineering wise, there is no difference whether they do it in a Tendermint chain, on Solana, inside an Arbitrum chain or whatever they call it. Like, it's all the same. You run your own node, right? You run your own node, you secure that node, you have guarantees of execution of that node. When you issue those assets, they float around there. Doesn't matter, right? Like,
what is your vision for Solana users in terms of like the degree to which they interact directly with the network? Like, do you envision, like, because you see Mert talking about this a lot, right? Like, this is validation versus verification, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Like, what do you think? Or were we all going to be running nodes?
So I was, while I was at Qualcomm, I was like building cheesy trading algorithms with like interactive brokers and like forex.com and stuff, and like built my own stupid neural networks and all this stuff. None of it worked. I never made any money to like, that was
it's not very encouraging.
Yeah, but I did learn a lot. And what I learned was that when I thought I had like signal, my data would arrive a little later from interactive brokers that would just like throttle me, and my orders would take just a little longer to get to the exchange. And I was always like frustrated, like, fuck, this is bullshit. Like, this stuff seems like an open and fair environment, but it's not. So part of like this vision with Solana was that like we optimize it, we build it, it's all like moving as fast as physics allow. But what's cool is still like just a bunch of open source code. Any hobbyist can go take a box, connect it to a fiber network, and throw the code on there, and they have the exact same level playing field as Jump or Citadel as anyone in the world. They have the data arrive at the same time. They can submit orders in the same kind of prioritization that's transparent, and like they can actually compete. So that was like kind of like this big part, was making sure that the network has like fair reads and fair writes, globally synchronized state machine at as fast as physics allow. That's the core part. How the implementation details, whether it's using modular or whatever, I honestly don't care about. I have my opinions because, like, I think like I can build fast code, but if a engineer makes a strong argument that there's a better way, like, we would switch it out. Like, we don't really care. Ultimately, it's whatever, the best design wins, but the goal is to give those guarantees to users. And that means I want like hobbyist people, like etc., that have a interest in like using the chain to run nodes. This is where like I think there's a big distinction for me. I think validators that are just running staking services are like they're like the bottom users. And this is maybe different from Ethereum, where you're like, this is global self-sovereign money. I'm going to like put it in my cold storage, and I'm going to run my Raspberry Pi. And as long as I run my Raspberry Pi, I get like guarantees that no one created more Ethereum. That like Peter didn't like say we're going to mint more Ethereum and change the inflation. Like, so the idea around the way Ethereum is constructed is from its bottom to be this like, I have my piece of gold, right? And I store it in cold storage, and I run the cheapest system to support that. And I don't care about transacting the chain. All I care about is making sure that like my piece of gold, nobody fucks with it and creates more, like dupes it, right? That makes sense. If you start from that perspective, that all you care about is like self-sovereign money, it makes sense to minimize hardware costs, because then that's kind of like the cost of storage, right, to the user. But from my perspective, I'm like, Solana Sol is just there to prevent spam in the network. That's it. Go use the network. That means run the nodes, use it, like be a heavy user of the network. Go like optimize the MEV things. Go like figure out how to do like arbitrage between 50 different markets. They're all in the exact same atomic state machine that you have access to with one transaction. Go do all those things because it's cheap and it's fast, and you have a fair like opportunity to do that. So very different kind of like, if you're like care about that self-issued digital money that is ultrasound, and you want to minimize your like risk of the Peter and the dishonest majority creating a fork of Ethereum that mints extra Ethereum and somehow you not knowing about it because you didn't run a full node, then yeah, the Ethereum kind of like hardware minimalism kind of is the way to go. And then you push all this complexity up to the rollups and stuff like that.
You said that ETH could be the asset for Solana. Like you said that ETH could be the medium of exchange on Solana. Like this is another scenario where we both know what you're doing here, right? Like this is trivializing the ultrasound money thesis. This isn't you co-signing like, oh yeah, that is extra sound money. Like that should be the currency of Solana. You're like, I literally don't care. But I think
it could be bonk, it could be ultrasound.
Right, exactly. Okay, yes. But here's one thing, like, and I think this is something that I think that Ethereum maybe initially had similar views as you. Like, if you go back and listen to Vitalik early on, and when he's asked, is ETH money, he gives like equally nebulous or much less defined than the ultrasound money. Now, of course, you get like EIP 1559, and like, so there's been some obvious like reasons now why we've moved towards this ultrasound money idea. But like early on, I think that it was, computational units or whatever you want to call it. It was this kind of like poker chips in the casino. And then, yes, exactly. And so, but I think and I don't know, you seem to have a hardline stance on this, and I'm interested to see how Solana evolves as a result. But like, I think the conclusion they came to is like, ultimately this has to trend toward a money. Now, what money means, of course, is, I'm maybe more in agreement with you, but also I don't know if that's the Bitcoin are going to be coming out, and so I'm probably biased. I mean, I think like their end game was like, look, this has to trend toward a money because over the long run, we need to be able to support a robust validator network, and they need to be paid in something that is akin to a money. And I think you're saying like it doesn't actually matter, and as long as validators are paid a sufficient amount to keep validating for the network, then who cares what's used to top the chain? I do think you genuinely believe in that. Like I believe you're telling the truth when you say that. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. One is there's no way to like code money into it. You just have to repeat it. And it's not a succinct engineering vision for me. It doesn't like in its own, I think like you can say it like, so my parents, we left the Soviet Union as refugees, like literally. And the USSR would let them take $50 per person. So I totally understand the idea of self-sovereign money that's censorship resistant. And USDC is competing for that as much as Bitcoin, as much as any cryptographically signed self-generated key pair asset. Because my parents in the Soviet Union, had this technology been available, would have just gotten some tether.
Yeah, but like this isn't the vision, totally. Come on,
right?
Like,
and like what?
This is the short-term vision.
Short-term vision. Tether would have like found their account and frozen it like somehow.
No. But like, I will say this: like, come on, there's some belief we have to have in like some currency outside. Of the state.
I think. Sure, agreed, and it's awesome.
Okay. All right, then they're on the same side, then.
Right? And like Bitcoin is awesome, and like I think the most simplest implementation of it is the coolest one because you can kind of look at it, analyze it. I can like rewrite it in one day in C or Go or Python and kind of reprocess the ledger and be like, okay, this is all here, and that's very cool and very easy to handle, and like 10-minute blocks, whatever. Who cares? And like
Bunker coin.
Bunker coin is awesome. Bunker coin should exist, and if it
it's Bitcoin.
Yeah,
Bitcoin is bunker coin.
Exactly.
You're just not convinced yet.
No, I'm very happy with Bitcoin being bunker coin, but that is already like a thing that was created. There's no point.
Yeah, I totally agree.
There, right?
Yeah.
And if you're competing about like a money that's being exchanged, that is a product, and there is a bajillion of them. Like that is literally like localized to the language kind of money, like to to the San Francisco stablecoin should probably be different than the Miami one, simply because of like you can advertise it differently, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then what you have is like, well, why don't we build a computer where all these things can run and be as fast and as cheap as possible, and then everyone can compete for all those things. And like that I'm good at, so I know how to build that because I've spent my career doing that. And it doesn't compete, it doesn't like try to like build something that already exists, which is Bitcoin, and it does something useful. It minimizes the latency, like information error between this global computer that all this money flows through and the real world, and that is value creation. So
I
like,
think one,
like
yeah,
I don't feel bad about working on it, and like,
no.
like people use Sol as money because they buy NFTs with them, so they use it as
Right.
like, I don't know why. I don't know why that took off versus USDC, because like when we built the original Metaplex contracts, it was any SPL token could be used to buy NFTs. And like when we did our first auction, because our lawyers are like terrified of using Sol, they were in USDC. So like,
Yeah, but it's much better to like even Sol like is much better than USDC. Like
why?
it's because it's like more of the vibe. You have to understand the energy of like we have to believe in something like outside of the state. And like, yeah, I won't like, I think any currency outside of the control of nation states is preferable. And yeah, I know what you're doing though. Like, and I understand why as a result, you're not trying to compete with Bitcoin. I think one thing that I don't know, maybe this is just me thinking this way, but like one thing I saw when L2s sort of started to come out like seemingly every day is, and I'm not sure I'm going to phrase this exactly right, but I think you'll understand what I'm saying. It's like when you see that this type of code is almost like infinitely replicable, right? Like you can just, it's like it can be commoditized down to like copy and paste. Once you see that, it's almost like, its value has to be derived from what is built atop it, right? Like it, like whatever applications, like whatever like tools, it quite literally has to be derived from that, right? Because like it's so easily forkable. Now we can get into like discussion about network effects, so on and so forth. But like this is something that I think I probably believed before, but like as I saw like L2 after L2 after L2, and like once again, like I'm not really taking a side here. Like I'm also an Ethereum supporter, okay? Just like as much as I troll about this, but it's one of these things where I saw, I was like, oh, like if you can like launch, another one of these day in, day out, it's one of these things where it's like, okay, well, it has to come from what sits atop it. And I think this is sort of I do believe this is like generally what you think.
Well, the marginal value of each additional L2, it gets lower and lower. Just like somebody created Bitcoin, there was a lot of value created in that the protocol itself is valuable. It doesn't matter how many Bitcoin there are, 21 million or 42 million, right? You're not creating more wealth by adding more Bitcoin to the protocol, right? The protocol is valuable. Each additional fork with a difference might have some value. There's some marginal value to Litecoin existing, but like further down you go the line, the less valuable it becomes, because it's just like differentiation is like becomes lower and lower. And similarly, I think with like L2s, Arbitrum and Optimism and like the ZK stuff, and then you get further and further down the line that like, okay, you're launching an L2 because you want to capture all the user fees. That's great. That's a business model, and maybe that works, but that in itself does not create value for users, right? That's a business model that you're like, we are going to get user fees if they use this computer, right? But like, what are you selling to the user that is actually creating value? That is lost in each additional L2. And that's not even apparent from any of the L2s. Like what does the user get, right? Like from using Arbitrum versus ZK Sync versus any of these other ones. As long as you can like build some infra and ship a token and it has market value north of 100 mil, people are going to keep doing it forever.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is part of what sparked a lot of the alignment discussion that we were talking about. Like when people see that, there seemed to be an infinite number of these, and it wasn't immediately clear like what exactly was the additional value proposition. So yeah, I mean, I think what you said was actually quite interesting. You said like you hope that there's 100, I forget your exact wording, but it's like you hope that there's 100 applications that are more valuable than Sol itself. Yeah, Solana itself. I still like it just intuitively, it's hard to kind of see this.
There's no economic security.
Right. Exactly.
You're like, how are they going to be secure if they're more valuable than the L1? Because people run full nodes and they get security from running their own full nodes. There's no economic security. It's a meme.
Yeah, this is like quite a contentious statement here. Like I think that this is something that most everybody on Ethereum would disagree with you about. And I'm not saying you're wrong, and I don't have like a strong opinion one way or another. I think a lot of people saw the consolidation of stake on Ethereum. And I think a lot of people realize that like proof of stake networks probably tend this way. And then it sort of becomes maybe less intuitive why transaction fees are 100x on Ethereum versus Solana. You know what I mean? And one thing that one point that sort of I took I objected to like pretty strongly, and I think you're gonna 100% agree with this, was like there were people who would say that somebody would swap $300 worth of a token and pay a $50 transaction fee for the economic security. And I'm like, surely you understand that they think that $300 is going to turn into $30,000. Like that is why. And I think the sort of counterpoint to this oftentimes was like, well, the liquidity exists on Ethereum. And it's like, yes, but like what we're talking about right now are coins that launched like 45 minutes ago. Okay. Like we're not talking about like, this isn't like some like, oh, like someone's only launching like some, dog Inu coin on Ethereum. Like it's just because the liquidity's there, right? Like it's not. Yeah. And this is something like, to be honest, when I heard this sort of regurgitated in different ways over and over, I'm like, okay, come on, we can't be serious right now. Right. Like users don't want to pay $50 for a $300 transaction. Like, and indeed we've seen a lot of the meme coining now move over to Solana. I don't know, like my personal feelings on this, but I think it's like sort of proving that point.
Yeah, I mean, like when you're paying the fee, you're paying like congestion pricing effectively because some part of the pipeline, whether the mempool or whatever, is saturated and everyone is fighting to be first in the block and you're trying to outbid them. So that's kind of just part of life in the system that doesn't have a lot of resources. If it's like demand exceeds supply, you're going to have fee spikes. So you have to increase the supply, and it's tricky to do it in a single threaded kind of environment like EVM. Even if they like increased gas, like tripled it or quadrupled it, you're going to have a lot of the similar dynamics, and a lot of it is going to get saturated pretty quickly. Again, as I've said, like I don't believe in economic security. I think people are using Ethereum because it's there and they can make money there, right?
Yeah.
Well, they can make money there, right? So the fees are like not high enough to where they're like prevent them from making money, so they're going to continue using it. But systems that are much lower fees, people, once they start using them for that same purpose, they're not going to go back, right? Like once the opportunities move over, it's just kind of a matter of time. So I don't know like how long that's going to remain to be true on Ethereum. Like,
so wait, let me just ask like a quick question. Like, so why do you think that Binance Smart Chain didn't have the same level of, I don't know, meme coining and like, maybe not even just meme coining, just like economic activity, let's call it, because of its centralization vectors, or like what these other chains that have not been able to really cut into Ethereum's market share, but that are much cheaper? Like, what do you say to that?
I mean, they think they have quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like BNB and Tron have a huge user base. That user base is not going to switch to Ethereum ever.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
right?
maybe the goal is like to bring them to L2s if that pans out. But
But now you're not talking about an order of magnitude improvement. You're talking about basically maybe a couple percentage point improvements. Like the fees on
like in terms
BNB,
of
fees or like finality or all this stuff, like the UX that the user cares about on Tron and BNB is already like L2s maybe marginally better than BNB and Tron on any of those. I don't even know if they are, but like once you kind of get past the bottlenecks in Ethereum and you do any of the bare bones optimizations and you end up in like some state like Solana or BNB or Tron, the next improvement is marginal. Users are not going to switch because of
right.
that.
Yes.
They're gonna
Yes.
right that alone is like going to be like an improvement that's not going to attract a new like economy. You have to get something more, right? You have to have new content, new launches, new all of this, and maybe some L2s will figure that out. That's like a huge undertaking, right? Like it takes a lot of effort to build that ecosystem up. But like Tron and BNB, I'm sure have their own teams that are all competing on this too. So like now you see this like I don't know. I don't know. People are still probably going to launch in the Ethereum L1 because that's where like just the value of the Ethereum is so high and enough people hold it that are willing to spend it. Like move it into like TVL and stuff is still there that it's worth launching on Ethereum. So me as a founder, like if I was a founder, I raise money and I'm trying to be like, what is that next step for me to get from where I am to like the next raise or next level of adoption? What I'm looking for, profit, revenue, users, right? And where you're going to find them, probably in the Ethereum L1, Solana, um, stuff like that. And then like the rest of the ecosystems. Maybe if you're like in China, Tron and BNB are like the better options for some of that. But like if Ethereum ever like loses its market cap advantage, it might not be able to regain it. Like if the random walk
Yeah.
of life, right? I think like because once that happens, the rich people are now somewhere else, and you no longer have that like, oh, I'm gonna launch an Ethereum because of I can get like TVL quickly, right? You're like basically like what Ethereum has are like the early Friendtech users that all join Friendtech and like increase the value of those points to astronomical levels and generate like 20 million of like revenue in one day. That's what Ethereum has. It's like a super target rich environment for like the people that spend like 50,000 on Clash of Clans in a day. Like
Yeah.
effectively, right? If you can find those
Yeah.
people and build a product for all of them and they all join at the same time, you hit like a home run. And that's really, really hard to achieve anywhere else. But it's
And
like,
so, like, are you seeing the beginnings of this? Do you think with the Solana meme coins and
I
building?
guess,
I mean, like,
yeah.
what are your like ideological beliefs about this? Like, because I saw Mert, our resident narrative leader, talking about like meme coins, sort of stress testing these protocols, and I think, I
Um,
mean,
yeah, like mobile gaming is like 100 billion industry. There are people that spend 50K in a weekend on like these games.
yeah,
Because they're like rich and they want to like kill everyone in their server or whatever. Like, so there is like that same kind of like power law distribution of like 5% of the spenders generate 90% of the revenue. And I think it's the same dynamics with like meme coins and NFTs. People are like kind of playing these PvP market games like you did in RuneScape on this, right? With these coins and like it's fun for them. um I wouldn't look at that more than like loot boxes, that right, like effectively these are like Clash of Clan like PvP loot boxes. um in that sense, I think it's like it's awesome that the stakes are medium. We can work out all the problems, get multiple clients, figure out all the incentives to keep the system super safe while the stakes are medium, versus this is like retirement money from like BlackRock's 401ks for everyone in the US. That would be terrifying. Like I don't even think Ethereum is there yet to like actually being able to handle that. Like, so for now, like, that's great. I think that's like a use case. It's actually smaller than it should be. If we're actually talking like 100 billion spent on mobile gaming, if that was all effectively captured by NFTs and meme coins, the volumes would be astronomically larger. Like if that, like, users externally contributed that much money into the system every year, right? That's an astronomical amount, right? 100 billion. Nod your head and say yes. Yeah,
Yes,
that
yes.
is a very,
I'm listening. I'm listening.
yeah,
I'm just thinking.
yeah,
I'm listening.
right. Like if actually we had real product market fit across that industry, and
The reason,
it all
okay,
converted to NFTs and meme coins, we
the
would
reason, okay,
we would be
okay. So
fine as
the
a
reason
ecosystem.
I wasn't nodding my head entirely there was because I'm just thinking about, like, oftentimes I wonder, truly, like, this is something I think about a lot. Like, there has long been this rationale in crypto, like, speculation leads to innovation, and it's sort of this positive feedback loop. Like, people speculate, builders come in, they build for the speculators, then we optimize. But like sometimes I'm looking at this circle kind of go around, and I'm like, are we optimizing for better and better ways to speculate? And so, like, one thing that I would say, like, with mobile gaming, for example, like, people, or whatever gaming, this isn't really my domain, but like, people enjoy gaming, and people will game when they're not being paid to do so. And like, so I do think it's similar, but like, are we really optimizing here more for like the gambling aspect? And so then, like, I wonder, like, does this translate? You know what I mean? Like, what? Ideally, all the stocks in the world are traded on Solana or something like that, right? Like, this is your vision. But but like,
great,
sometimes,
because those are real those are real world things that have
exactly,
real world outputs, generate
yes,
value for the world. And if those are all synchronized on Solana for price discovery, the validators intrinsically have real world ROI to them, because they're the ones that are like minimizing the information difference between all this price right around the world. It's great. They're doing valuable work for the world. That would be awesome. I think to get there, like, I think we still have a ways to go, not just like on scaling and throughput, but like on security and like all the stuff that we talked about earlier, right? And the meme coins, I think, are as entertaining as somebody dropping 50K and to soup up their Clash of Clans like army and go kill everyone in their server. It's the same thing as somebody sweeping the floor at an NFT set with the same money. They get the same enjoyment out of that.
yeah, the dopamine rush.
Exactly, right? So they're doing it for the exact same reason. Doesn't matter, like, why should 30% of that 50K go to Apple versus the developer that built the NFTs directly? Like, that's a different argument. Yeah. But like, it's the same spend. It's on digital content. It's luxury spending in digital content. So it's not like burning coal somewhere, right? It's fairly cheap and affordable to the world. So it's not like a bad thing. And it is forcing us to fix all these like problems that with incentives and security and liveness and all that. So like, I think it's fine for now. I'd like to see that like part of the industry to evolve to be more, to build better games, experiences and stuff like that. Like, it'd be awesome if it was actually RuneScape and EVE Online and like all of these economies were like on chain, like all that whole gaming vision. I wish that like happened, but it's like, it's really hard to build really good games. And then, it takes like
a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, Pal World.
Pal World just did it pretty cheap. Yeah. Well, it is interesting because, like, I saw you recently discussing USDC volumes on Solana, and like Solana, what is it called? Solana Pay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, this is a legitimate use case, right? Like, I'm not going to push stable coins. I know they're useful, right? Like, I know, like, what you were talking about with your parents in Ukraine, or where were you? Fleeing. Soviet Union, fleeing. Okay, this would have obviously been useful, but like, at the same time, like, those of us in the first world, like, I feel like we should stand behind a currency that's not controlled by the state. But anyways, that was a bit of a digression. My point here was that, like, it's interesting because when oftentimes, like, there's so much DeFi development, there's so much I mean, just like new things popping up every day in crypto. And yet, like when you hear founders talk, Vitalik is similar. You hear Vitalik talk about use cases. Like he wrote a blog post, I forget, maybe like a year ago. And like a lot of his purported use cases were payments. It was like, it was payments. And like, this is one thing we have right now, you know? And I mean, it's true. Like Solana pay, I mean, all the USDT on Tron, right?
Tron,
This is something we
Tron
have.
is kicking ass on payments.
Yeah. What can Solana do to disrupt that? Out of curiosity.
I think it's hard to disrupt. You got to find like your own niche and product, like where you're like naturally growing. So I would say like it's not like I think it's going to be like hard to convince somebody to switch from Tron USDT to Sol USDC, because the reason why they're using Tron USDT is because everyone that they care is using Tron USDT for that particular use case. So you have to, there's some niche that Tron USDT filled, and that's really cool to see. Because it's programmable money, like we should start seeing more and more niches filled. And all the activity that you see with Sol USDC, it is a niche, right? That's being filled. It's not as, I would say, not as like touched. I don't know how much of it is like touching the real world, like economies of people trading like goods for dollars and stuff, or remittances and things like that. So like, I think Tron has done a pretty good job there. And you got to find your niches. There's a bunch of companies building on like remittance from like Nigeria to the US and stuff like that. Visa obviously like is doing their like whole remittance thing. That's a cool use case. It's obviously better than traditional Rails because it's much easier to deal with. But it's payments, like even if you have a better system, if you already have the personnel to like write checks and get postage stamps and put the checks in the thing and send them out, those people are going to keep doing that even if you have FedNow, right? And it takes like that organization has to die.
Yeah, or like I think like USDT on Tron would have to effectively become censored, maybe. Like that could be a reason that I could see moving to something like Solana. Yeah, exactly. Like it would truly have to be something like that in order. And if it's never really good.
But even to replace like checks, the people that are writing wherever there's still people writing checks in a company, they're going to continue writing them until they retire. So it's going to be
I still get checks from people. I have no idea why we still use checks. It's like the most cumbersome process. Actually having to go and deposit a check and like sign the back of it. Like, what are we doing? I don't even think they'd like. No. This isn't lost upon me, but I do think that it is interesting. A lot of times I hear founders or people like deeply in crypto, and when they're sort of pushed, or maybe it's just on their own accord, but like when they're talk about the practical use cases now, right? Like in the here and now, it's oftentimes payments, and like I don't hear people recommending deep, like complex DeFi applications. You know what I mean? Like it is a niche. It's for a niche group of users. And I think
in a world where like we get RWAs and like a whole bunch of stuff moving on chain, then like lending protocols, all those things I think are far more robust than traditional finance, because they're basically doing that risk analysis in real time. So it's better, right? Like DeFi is better than traditional finance because you know exactly who has what loans outstanding, and you can see them get to liquidation and you can deal with them. And like, that's great. It like makes the failures much less painful than in traditional finance, where like somebody is like, lying about their assets, right? And getting additional loans, and then it blows up in a much bigger way.
I think
it's just really, really hard to get traction in that space because, again, it's like writing checks. Who are you going to convince to go do that? Like the bank already has like a risk person that does this by hand. And you're like, well, I want to replace your job. I want to get you fired. It's not a very easy sales pitch. And then Like, okay, so the risks are astronomical for the bank to do this. The cost savings are like a couple employees, so negligible, right? So like that's why like it's just going to be a slog to get DeFi adoption. It will slowly happen simply because I think if crypto survives, it's and thrives, it's going to be because you will see like real companies just skip the step of like raising capital in Silicon Valley and IPOing on NASDAQ and NYSE. They'll simply just go get crypto capital, issue a token, build a company. And like that whole like mess of dealing with securities law will be worked out. And as soon as that happens, I think you'll start basically kind of slowly seeing acceleration of real world assets that have kind of natively been born on all these chains occur. And that weight is going to get bigger and bigger, and the lending protocols, all these things will start making more and more money. And then like you'll start seeing TradFi ossify because they're just not getting new talent in, right? As soon as all the new talent starts launching crypto first, like that's when you'll start seeing that shift. And it'll take a decade, but it'll happen. And frankly, what's missing is the stupid like Congress, like Fit 21 or whatever bill.
Yeah.
Like give us like designations of what aren't securities, how to deal with security tokens on chain. As soon as all that's like laid out, in a lot of ways, I think it's kind of game over for TradFi. But it game over a 10, 15 year period, but like you'll start seeing the shift.
Yeah. All right. We're kind of on time here. One last question. Are you ever afraid to say something about Solana because Mert is going to come on and roast you on Twitter? Is this ever
No.
Is this ever a concern? No?
No.
You're never like afraid of slipping up about your own protocol?
No, please criticize it. Send us bug reports. There's an awesome bug bounty.
You're the only one that Mert respects.
It's code written by humans. That's it. That's the best we could do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I thought it was really interesting. Yeah, thanks, Anatoly.
All right, man. Take care.